The storm was 20 minutes out when Petra Halford saw the rowboat. She had been climbing the lighthouse stairs with a jar of lamp oil tucked under one arm, her boots striking the iron steps in the same rhythm they had struck them every evening for 6 years. Wind howled through the cracks in the stone walls. The sea below the cliffs had turned the color of hammered lead, and the first threads of lightning stitched the horizon together in brief, violent flashes. She needed to light the lamp before the storm swallowed the coast. But halfway up she paused at the narrow window that faced the open water. And there it was. A single rowboat cutting through the swells, headed directly for her shore. Her shore. The forbidden shore. The stretch of jagged coastline that the Alpha King himself had sealed off by royal decree 4 years ago, after the territory wars had ended and the northern cliffs had been declared too dangerous for settlement. Every wolf in the kingdom knew the law. No one came here. No one was supposed to come here. Except someone was. Petra pressed her forehead against the cold glass and squinted through the spray. One figure. Broad-shouldered, pulling the oars with the kind of steady, deliberate power that suggested he was not struggling against the current so much as refusing to acknowledge it existed. No escort vessel, no flag, no lantern on the bow. Just a man, rowing alone into a storm, toward a shore where he had no business being. She should have ignored it. She should have climbed the rest of the stairs, lit the lamp, and let the sea sort out whatever fool had decided to challenge a gale in a wooden boat. That was what the decree was for. That was what 6 years of isolation had taught her. Other people's choices were not her responsibility. But her hands were already setting down the oil jar. Her feet were already carrying her back down the stairs. She told herself it was practical. If he capsized near the rocks, the wreckage would block the tide channel she used to haul in driftwood. That was all. The wind hit her like a wall when she shouldered open the lighthouse door. Salt spray stung her cheeks and plastered loose strands of tawny gold hair against her face, the rest of it still caught in the thick braid that hung over one shoulder. She pulled her oilskin coat tighter and made her way down the cliff path, her boots finding the familiar grooves in the stone by memory alone. By the time she reached the narrow strip of black sand at the base of the cliffs, the rowboat was close enough for her to see him clearly. He was tall. That was the first thing. Even seated and bent forward with each stroke of the oars, the breadth of him was unmistakable. Wide shoulders, corded forearms exposed where his sleeves had been pushed back, hands that wrapped around the oar handles like they had been built for exactly this kind of work. His hair was coal black, long enough to reach his shoulders, pulled back and tied at the nape of his neck, though the wind had torn several strands loose across his face. His jaw was set. His eyes were fixed on the shore, on her. Something shifted in Petra's chest. Not alarm, not quite recognition. Something deeper. Something that hummed beneath her ribs like a low note struck on a bell she hadn't known was there. She pressed her palm flat against her sternum and frowned. The boat scraped against the sand. He shipped the oars and climbed out in one fluid motion, hauling the bow up the beach with a single pull before the tide could drag it back. Then he straightened, and for the first time, she saw his eyes. Deep amber. The color of firelight trapped in glass. The humming in her chest intensified. "You're trespassing," Petra said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was something. "This shore is sealed by royal decree. Turn around." He studied her for a long moment. Rain was beginning to fall. Fat, cold drops that struck the sand like small detonations. His gaze moved from her face to the lighthouse perched on the cliff above them, then back. Something flickered behind those amber eyes. Not surprise. Something quieter. "I know what the decree says." His voice was low, rough at the edges like stone worn smooth by water but not quite finished. "I wrote it." The words landed like a physical weight. Petra stared at him. The wind screamed between the cliffs. Lightning split the sky behind him, and in the brief white flash she saw what she had missed before. the sigil embossed into the leather of his belt. A wolf and a crown, intertwined. The mark of the Alpha King of the Western Reach, Idris Lockmore. The king who had sealed her coast. The king who had, with a single decree, turned her home into a place the rest of the world was forbidden to touch. And he was standing on her beach, in a storm, alone. You... She took a step back. The humming in her chest had become a roar, a deep resonance that vibrated through her bones like waves striking the cliff face during high tide. She pressed harder against her sternum. You can't be here. And yet... He tilted his head slightly, rain streaming down his face. He made no move to wipe it away. Here I am. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended, but she had spent 6 years alone on this shore, tending a lamp that guided ships away from rocks that would split their hulls, and in all that time, not a single soul had come. Not a supply boat, not a messenger, not even a curious fisherman willing to risk the fine. She had chosen this isolation, had fought for it, had begged the previous keeper to let her take his place when his lungs gave out. But she had not chosen to be forgotten. And now the man responsible for sealing her away was standing in front of her, looking at her like she was the answer to a question he had been carrying for a very long time. "The lamp," he said. "You need to light it before the storm hits." She blinked. "I know that. I've been lighting it every night for 6 years." "Then we should go up." He glanced at the sky. "You can decide what to do with me after." Every instinct told her to refuse, to send him back to his boat and his kingdom and his decrees that had drawn a line around her life without ever asking whether she wanted one. But the storm was close now. She could taste the ozone on the back of her tongue, and the lamp needed lighting, and she was not the kind of woman who let pride drown a man on her own shore. "Follow me," she said, "and stay out of my way." She turned and climbed the path without looking back to see if he followed. She didn't need to. She could feel him behind her, a warmth at her back that had nothing to do with body heat, a presence that resonated in her chest like the deep toll of a harbor bell. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin for the first time in years, not in warning, in recognition. No. She shoved the sensation down so hard it made her dizzy. She was not doing this. Not with him. Not with anyone. And certainly not with a king who had signed his name to the document that had made her invisible. The lighthouse was warm inside, the iron stove she kept burning year-round pushing heat into the circular stone walls. Petra took the stairs 2 at a time, snatched the oil jar from where she had left it on the landing, and continued up to the lamp room without pausing. Behind her she heard his footsteps, measured, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. It made her want to climb faster. The lamp room sat at the top of the tower, encased in glass panels that gave a full view of the sea in every direction. On a clear night, the light could be seen for 15 miles. Tonight, the glass was streaked with rain, and the world beyond it had been swallowed by charcoal clouds and churning water. Petra filled the reservoir, trimmed the wick with the small knife she kept in her coat pocket, and struck the flint. The flame caught on the first try. It always did. She had gotten very good at this, and the massive lens began to rotate, throwing a beam of warm gold light out into the storm. She stood back, watched the light sweep across the water, let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You do this alone." His voice came from the doorway behind her. Not a question. Every night. For 6 years. "I just said that." A pause. She could feel his gaze on her back, like a hand pressed between her shoulder blades. The decree was meant to protect the coast from scavengers. After the wars, the cliffs were full of unexploded charges and the smuggling routes. "I know why the decree exists." She turned to face him. In the amber light of the lamp, his eyes were molten. The resonance in her chest pulsed. "What I don't know is why you're here. The charges were cleared 2 years ago. The smuggling routes dried up the year before that. There is no reason to keep this shore sealed, and there hasn't been for a long time. Something shifted in his expression. The controlled composure cracked, just barely. And beneath it she caught a flash of something raw. Guilt. I know, he said quietly. Then why haven't you lifted it? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he moved to one of the glass panels and looked out at the storm. The light swept over him in rhythmic passes. Gold, shadow, gold, shadow. And in the brief illumination she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't quite get right. Because I forgot. Pauses. His voice was barely above a whisper. I forgot someone was still here. The words hit her harder than the wind had, harder than 6 winters alone, harder than the silence that greeted her every morning when she woke, and every night when she banked the stove and climbed into a bed meant for one. He had forgotten her. Right. She turned back to the lamp. Her throat was tight, and she would not let him see what that admission had done to her. She would not. Well, now you know. Someone is still here. You can lift the decree from the comfort of your palace. You didn't need to row through a storm for that. Petra. Her name in his mouth stopped her cold. She hadn't told him her name. She hadn't told anyone her name in years. There was no one to tell. But he said it like he had been carrying it. Like the weight of it was something he had discovered and could not put down. The harbor master in Crestfall told me about you, he said, and she heard him take a step closer. 3 months ago. I was reviewing coastal reports, and his mentioned a keeper still manning the Northpoint light. I asked how long. He said 6 years. Another step. I asked if anyone had been sent to check on the keeper. He said no. The shore was sealed. No one goes in. No one comes out. The resonance in her chest was so strong now that she could feel it in her fingertips. She curled her hands into fists. I came because I should have come a long time ago, he said. Because I signed a decree to protect a coastline, and instead I sealed a woman inside it. And I have been... Voice breaks. I have been trying to find the right way to say that I am sorry. I rode here because I didn't want to arrive with soldiers and ceremony and make it about the crown. I wanted to come as the man who made the mistake. Just the man. She closed her eyes. The lamp turned above them, steady and faithful, the way she had been steady and faithful, the way she had tended the light even when no one cared whether it burned. You're soaking wet, she said finally, and her voice cracked on the last word. He let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in his lungs for months. I am. There's a fire downstairs, and tea. She opened her eyes and looked at him over her shoulder. His amber gaze was waiting for hers, and the impact of it sent a shudder through her that had nothing to do with the cold. I'm not forgiving you tonight, but I'm not letting you freeze either. Something softened in his face, not a smile, something more fragile than that. That's fair. They sat on opposite sides of the stove in the keeper's quarters. A small round room with a narrow cot, a writing desk buried under tide charts, and 2 mismatched chairs that Petra had salvaged from driftwood years ago. She made tea in a chipped clay pot and handed him a cup without a word. He wrapped both hands around it and drank without complaint, even though she knew it was bitter. She had run out of honey 2 months ago. How do you get supplies? He asked. I row to the fishing village on the other side of the headland, once a month when the tides are right. She sat back in her chair. They know I'm here. They don't ask questions. That's a 4-hour row. I'm aware. His jaw tightened. She watched the muscle flex beneath his rain-damp skin and felt the resonance pulse in answer. It was getting harder to ignore. Every time he spoke, every time he moved, the humming in her chest deepened. Not unpleasant, but insistent, like the sea itself was trying to tell her something she wasn't ready to hear. The decree will be lifted within the week, he said. I'll send word as soon as I return. And the lighthouse? Stays, if you want it. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "This is your home, Petra. I'm not taking it from you. I'm opening the door you should have always been able to walk through." She stared at the fire. The flames crackled and spat, and somewhere far below them the sea hurled itself against the cliffs with a sound like distant thunder. She had spent so long defining herself by this place. By the lamp. By the light. By the solitary rhythm of tending something that mattered even if no one saw it. That the idea of the door being open made her chest ache with something dangerously close to fear. "I chose this," she said quietly. "When the last keeper died, I asked to take his place. I was 17. My pack had just dissolved. Border dispute, land seized, families scattered. I had nowhere to go, and the lighthouse needed someone. It was—" She stopped, swallowed. "It was the first time something needed me." Pauses. He set his cup down. His hands were steady, but his eyes were not. In the firelight, the amber had darkened to something closer to burnished copper, and the emotion in them was so stark that she had to look away. "Something still needs you," he said. The words were rough, unpolished, like he had not planned to say them and they had come out anyway. She looked back at him. "The lighthouse?" "No." He held her gaze, and the resonance between them swelled until she could feel it in the walls, in the floor, in the bones of the tower itself. A deep, oceanic hum that matched the rhythm of the waves outside. Not the lighthouse. The storm raged for 3 hours. They talked through most of it. Not about the decree, not about the bond she could feel tightening between them with every passing minute, but about smaller things. He told her about the reconstruction efforts in the Eastern Territories, about the councils that ran too long and the advisors who confused caution with cowardice. How he had rebuilt the southern bridge with his own hands alongside the workers because the foreman had said it couldn't be done before winter, and Idris had taken that personally. She told him about the whale pod that passed through every autumn, how she would climb to the top of the lamp room and watch them breach in the silver morning light, their massive bodies arcing through the air with a grace that made her chest ache. About the tide pools at the base of the south cliff that were full of creatures so strange they looked like they belonged to another world. Sea stars the color of burnt orange, anemones that closed like fists when you touched them. Tiny, translucent crabs that scattered like living glass across the rocks. "I've cataloged them," she said, and immediately wished she hadn't. It sounded foolish. A woman alone on a rock, making notes about tide pool creatures that no one would ever read. But he leaned forward. "You have records?" She gestured vaguely toward the desk buried under its tide charts. "Somewhere in that pile, 6 years of coastal observations. Water temperatures, migration patterns, erosion rates." "I didn't—" She shrugged, heat creeping up her neck. "There was nothing else to do at night." "Petra." The way he said her name made her look up. His expression was intent, serious in a way that had nothing to do with politics. "The Royal Maritime Council has been trying to map the northern coastal ecosystem for 2 years. They have 12 scholars and a fleet of survey vessels, and they have produced nothing close to what you're describing." She blinked. "I just wrote down what I saw. For 6 years. Consistently. From a fixed observation point that no one else has access to." He shook his head slowly. "You didn't just keep a light burning. You built an archive." Something warm and unfamiliar bloomed in her chest. Not the resonance. Something older, more human. The feeling of being seen. Not the lighthouse keeper. Not the woman behind the lamp. Her. She cleared her throat and changed the subject to the gull that had taken up residence on her windowsill and screamed at her every morning until she fed it. He laughed when she described the escalating war between them, how she had tried blocking the sill with driftwood, and the gull had simply knocked it off and screamed louder. The sound of his laughter, low and warm and startled like he hadn't expected it, made the resonance in her chest hum so intensely that she pressed both hands flat against her knees to steady herself. He noticed. Of course he noticed. "You feel it," he said. She didn't pretend to misunderstand. "Yes." "How long?" "Since you stepped off the boat." She met his eyes. "You?" "Since Crestfall." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and the firelight caught the sharp planes of his face. "When the harbor master said your name, something—" He pressed his fist against his chest, right over his heart. "Here," like a wave hitting rock. I thought I was losing my mind. Resonance. That was the word her old pack elders had used for it. The rarest form of the bond. Not a pull, not a thread, not a warmth. A frequency. Two wolves whose very natures vibrated at the same pitch, so that when one spoke, the other felt it in their bones. It couldn't be manufactured, it couldn't be faked, and it couldn't be ignored, no matter how many miles of sealed coastline you put between them. "I'm not leaving the lighthouse," Petra said. The words came out fierce, almost defiant, because the thing she feared most right now was not the bond. It was the possibility that the bond would ask her to become someone she wasn't. "I'm not trading this for a palace. I'm not becoming a queen who sits in a throne room and forgets what salt air smells like. This is my home. This light is my purpose. I won't." "Petra." He said her name the way the sea said the shore's name, constant, returning, inevitable. "I rode here alone because I wanted you to know that I am willing to come to you, not the other way around." She stared at him. "I have a kingdom full of people who want things from me," he said, and his voice had dropped to something barely above a whisper. "Alliances, decisions, appearances. I have spent 5 years giving pieces of myself to every corner of the Western Reach, and not once." He stopped. His throat worked. "Not once has anyone looked at me the way you did on that beach, like I was just a man. Like that was enough." The fire popped. Rain hammered the windows, and Petra felt something inside her shift. Not break, not shatter, but loosen. Like a rope that had been pulled taut for 6 years finally easing just enough for her to breathe. "It's not enough," she whispered. "You forgot about me." "I know." He didn't flinch, didn't look away. "And I will spend however long it takes proving that I will never forget again, if you'll let me." She didn't answer, not with words. She stood, crossed the small distance between them, and sat in the chair beside his, not touching, but close enough that the resonance between them became a single unbroken note, deep and steady and sure, like the lighthouse beam turning above them in its endless, faithful arc. They sat like that for a long time, shoulder to shoulder, watching the fire, letting the storm do its work outside while something quieter and more powerful built between them inside. It was almost dawn when the rain finally stopped. Petra climbed the stairs to check the lamp. Habit, muscle memory, the thing her body did without being told. He followed her, and this time she didn't mind the sound of his footsteps behind her. The lamp room was hushed in the storm's aftermath, the glass panels streaked with drying salt, the flame burning low as the first gray light of morning crept over the horizon. She reached for the wick adjuster. His hand was already there. Their fingers touched, and the resonance detonated. It was like the entire ocean surging through her at once, not painful, not overwhelming, but immense. A sound below hearing and a feeling beyond naming that started in her chest and radiated outward until every nerve in her body was humming at the same pitch as his. She gasped. Her hand trembled against the brass adjuster, and his fingers curled around hers, warm, steady, anchoring. "Petra." His voice was wrecked, raw. She looked up and found his amber eyes inches from hers, and the everything in them, the wanting, the reverence, the careful, terrified hope, made her breath catch. He kissed her, not desperately, not like a king claiming something that belonged to him. Slowly, deliberately, like he was learning the shape of her mouth and committing it to memory. His free hand came up to cradle her jaw, his thumb brushing the rain-dried salt from her cheekbone, and the gentleness of it, the sheer devastating tenderness, broke something open inside her that she had sealed shut long before he ever sealed this shore. She kissed him back, fierce, certain. Her fingers twisted in the front of his damp shirt and pulled him closer, and the resonance between them sang, not hummed, not pulsed, but sang, a sound like the lighthouse itself ringing with a frequency it had been built to hold. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was breaking the horizon. Orange and gold light poured through the glass panels and set the lamp room ablaze with color, and Petra stood in the center of it with her forehead pressed against his, breathing hard, her hand still fisted in his shirt. "I'm still angry with you," she murmured. His lips twitched. "I know. And I'm still not leaving the lighthouse. I would never ask you to. And if your council objects to the Alpha King rowing to a cliff to visit a woman who talks to gulls and catalogs tide pools, then my council can learn to row." He said it simply, without hesitation, and the certainty in his voice made her breath stutter. Not the certainty of a king issuing a command. The certainty of a man who had already made his choice and was simply waiting for her to believe it. She pulled back just enough to look at him. His amber eyes were bright with the sunrise, and the expression on his face was something she had never seen directed at her before. Not just from him, from anyone, like she was the light. "Then stay," she said. "Stay until the tide turns. And when you come back, because you will come back, bring honey. I've been out for 2 months." He laughed. That same low, startled sound, like joy, kept catching him off guard. He pressed his lips to her forehead, and the resonance settled into something warm and constant, like coals banked in a stove that would not go out. "I'll bring honey," he said against her skin, "and I'll come back, every time the tide allows it, and sometimes when it doesn't. That's not a promise from a king, Petra. That's a promise from the man who rode through a storm because the sea told him you were here." She closed her eyes, let herself lean into him, let the warmth of his chest and the steady drum of his heartbeat and the deep, resonant hum of the bond settle around her, like something she hadn't known she'd been waiting for. Not rescue, not salvation, just presence. Just someone choosing to come. 3 months later, the decree was not merely lifted, it was rewritten. The Northpoint shore was declared a protected territory under the direct stewardship of its keeper, with full supply lines restored, a harbor channel cleared for safe approach, and a small stone cottage built into the cliff base beside the lighthouse. 2 rooms instead of 1, a proper kitchen with copper pots that gleamed in the morning light, a hearth wide enough to warm the whole space, and a window that faced the sea. Petra had overseen every stone of its construction, had argued with the masons about the angle of the chimney flue until they relented and did it her way. It drew perfectly now. She had told Idris as much in her last letter, and he had written back a single line. "I would expect nothing less from the woman who won a war against a seagull." Petra stood in the doorway of the new cottage on a morning so clear that the horizon looked like a line drawn in ink, watching the familiar shape of a rowboat cutting through water that was, for once, calm as glass. He didn't always come by boat. The road from the capital had been cleared and paved, and most days his advisors preferred he take the carriage. But on mornings like this, when the sea was still and the air tasted like salt and possibility, he rowed. She had asked him once why he still did it. He had looked at her with those amber eyes and said, "Because that's how you met me. not the crown, the man. The boat scraped the sand. He climbed out, hauled it up the beach with the same single-armed pull that still made her stomach flip after 3 months, and started up the cliff path with a canvas sack over one shoulder. She met him halfway, bare feet on stone, her braids swinging, the sea green of her eyes catching the morning light. He dropped the sack, caught her face in both hands, and kissed her. Long and slow and thorough, the way he always kissed her, like every time was the first time, and he couldn't quite believe his luck. "Honey," he murmured against her lips. "What?" He reached down and pulled a jar from the sack, golden, thick, sealed with a cloth and a bit of twine. "You said to bring honey." Petra laughed. The sound carried across the water and bounced off the cliffs and scattered a flock of gulls from the lighthouse railing, and Idris watched her with an expression that was no longer startled by joy, but had learned to expect it. "Come inside," she said, taking the jar and his hand in the same motion. "The kettle's on." He followed her up the path, the same way he had followed her that first night. Steady, unhurried, like he had all the time in the world. The lighthouse stood above them, its lamp dark in the daylight but ready, always ready, to burn when the night came. And far below, the sea struck the cliffs in its ancient, constant rhythm, the same deep resonance that hummed between two wolves who had found each other not through ceremony or conquest or fate's gentle hand, but through a storm, a broken decree, and the stubborn, luminous refusal of a woman who kept the light burning when the whole world told her no one was watching. Someone had been watching. He just hadn't known it yet, but he knew it now. And every tide that turned, every dawn that broke gold over the Northpoint shore, he came back, not as a king, as hers.